Sunday with the celebration of Christ the King. And so the Gospels are necessarily, in the readings, are preparing us for the end of time, whether it be our own personal life or at the end of time in general. And we hear a pretty shocking gospel today, but it's interesting on a couple of different levels, where Jesus gives this parable of what is the kingdom of heaven like. And he's like, it's this man who entrusted certain talents to different servants based upon their abilities. Now, the interesting thing is, once these individuals received their talents, one received 5, one received 2, one received 1. The first 2 went out immediately into the world and they doubled their investment. I don't know what kind of shady lady negotiations you have to do to double your money, but they did it, and they did it immediately. And so they used their gifts and they doubled it. And the interesting thing to me is when the master comes back and asks for an accounting of it, they didn't take out any per diem, if you will. So they were given something that wasn't theirs in the first place, but they could easily say, well, it was my hard work and effort, and I had mileage and everything. I had a couple of business expenses. I had to wine and dine these people. So he could have easily said, well, I made 10 talents from my master, but I'll deduct the expenses. And he could have said, master, here's 6 talents in return, or here's 7. But he gave back everything. He didn't keep a dime for himself. And the second guy does the same thing. He's given 2 talents. He immediately goes out and doubles his money, but then gives it back to the master. And the master would never have known. He never would have known. But we know in this parable the master is God and he knows everything. But the interesting thing is the third one gets chastised and punished for giving back what was given to him. Now, you would think that that's kind of commendable. That could you imagine if someone gave you $1 million and said, okay, go out and do something with it? Well, the first thing we might do is, be tempted to say, well, it'd be nice to be able to pay my rent off or to pay off my car and this and that. And we have intentions of going out and doing the master's work, but we're going to start to steal cookies from the cookie jar very soon. And at the end, when the master comes unexpectedly, there might be half of it left or none of it left. But rather, this guy buried it in the ground because he was afraid of losing that. And so you figure that would be a commendable thing, that at least he didn't waste it or anything like many of us might do. But when he gives it back, he is chastised, because at least you should have put it in the bank and the master could have gotten interest. This parable is about how we use our faith and how we use the different gifts that God has given us. And it is not enough for us to try to get through life unscathed and bring our soul and our Catholic faith to God one day. Said, okay, I've kept my soul intact. I've avoided these bad things and I tried to do good things. So here I am, Lord. That somehow is not enough. And so we have to have the attitude of the first 2 people that went out immediately into the world and they used their giftedness. And it's not just a matter of making money. We are here to bring souls to heaven. And so we must go out into the world and to try to share the faith that we have. But it becomes extremely more difficult as time goes on. But I dare say never has it been harder to be a Christian than in the very beginning. The very beginnings of the Christian church, where they were physically martyred or if they just didn't make a pagan sacrifice. And they had to deny their faith or be killed. And the Christians preferred to not stain their faith by giving a false witness, particularly to the children and the ones that are coming in back of them. And so we don't have to really worry about suffering a martyrdom here in our culture, thank goodness. But if we are not suffering for the faith, then we are not giving witness to that faith. And so the main thing that we need to be radiating out to the world is joy. We need to go out into the world to try to bring comfort to those that are mourning. All you have to do is to engage in a conversation with someone for 30 seconds, and you're going to find that they are upset or they are mourning, and there's always going to be all sorts of things that are going to trigger them into despair and to say, where is God in all of this? We will continue with the second half of this gospel next Sunday, which is, as we said, the solemnity of Christ the King. And Matthew's gospel is probably, for next weekend, is probably the most important in the entire Bible. Remember when you were in school and you got this impossible reading assignment and said, okay, you have to read this entire book by next Friday. And there's always that kid in the back of the class who raises his hand and says, what's going to be on the test? That's a fair question because of all of the pages of the material that you're responsible for, that you have to read this by next Friday. What's going to be on the test? So I'll give you a little spoiler alert. The gospel for next Sunday is the test. Chapter 25 of Matthew's gospel, verses 31 to 45. The judgment of the nations. Don't see anybody writing that down. You must have excellent memories. Oh no, that's right, you're Catholics. Please try to read that this week, because our Christian faith is not just about believing in certain things, praying certain things, but also it is going out in the world and doing. And many times that is what is missing in somebody's spirituality, is that ministry where we engage with others, where we look into someone else's eyes. It's not taking care of the poor. It's not just about writing a check or leaving food at the doorstep of some pantry somewhere, but it is also engaging somebody that maybe the food that they need is compassion. Maybe what they're thirsting for is someone to listen to them. Maybe the clothing that they need is not just gloves and a sweater and a jacket, but to be clothed in the sacraments. To go out and look for someone that does not know Jesus and maybe just invite them to come to Mass, to be in the presence of God, and perhaps let just the Holy Spirit do all the work. There might be something in the readings that will reach out to them and that will speak to them. For example, in the first reading we heard from the book of Proverbs, we hear about a worthy wife and giving all of these characteristics and then saying how she puts her hands to the staff and her fingers to the spindle and she's working, but she takes these very same hands that she's providing for her household and the upkeep of her household. She reaches out her hands to the poor, to the needy, and extends her arms to the needy. And that's what we all have to do. Yes, we all have to work in some fashion, but we must also extend these same hands out to the poor. And the judgment of the nations, the gospel for next Sunday, is rather shocking. Many times people spend their Christian lives avoiding bad things. And so if you can have a football team with the greatest defense in the world, but guys, you gotta score at least a safety. That's 2 points. Or better yet, maybe a field goal. But how about a touchdown? And how about multiple touchdowns? And so no one wants to go to a game where it's 0-0. And, then it goes into triple overtime and the defense is a battle of defense, but no one can put points on the board. And so it's not enough for us to avoid looking at these things or doing these things or saying these things. Yes, we must have a great defense, but we must also get out into the world and put points on the board. And so the 3 individuals in the gospel today, 2 of them went out immediately. And yes, they used the giftedness that God had entrusted to them, but they went out and they doubled the master's investment, and they gave everything back to him. How many times, though, when we have a friend, a child, a spouse, a sibling, whoever it might be, that gets called home, that gets called up to the big leagues, and we have to stay here still in AAA ball. They get called up to where the master always wanted them to be. To hear those blessed words, Come, my good servant, and inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the beginning of time. But we might be resentful because they didn't die at the ripe old age of 99, but rather they died early. And we're not giving back to God what he freely gave to us. We're holding back. We need to be like the first two in the gospel that gave everything. They, with their sweat of their brow and their cunning and their ingenuity, they doubled those talents, but they didn't subtract the per diem. They didn't take what was, many people would say, justifiably theirs. They gave everything back. Jesus lived for only about 33 years. And so the Father didn't have his Son reach a ripe old age, and at the age of 120, he was crucified, but rather at the prime of his life. Death is not the end. It is the beginning of eternity. It's a door that we must all cross through. We do not know when that is going to be. And that's why in the second reading, St. Paul tells us that we must be prepared because like a thief in the night will come the Lord. And thank goodness we do not know our personal expiration date. But the Gospels for today and for next Sunday are preparing us not just for our death, but for our life now, to try to live better, to not take for granted the amount of time that we have left, but to go out immediately in the world and engage with others. It's about the salvation of souls and trying to bring others back, and not just bringing our Catholic faith unscathed to the Father, but to be able to bring at least maybe 10 others. Could you imagine if each of us, in the course of a year, just to the church, that will be a committed Christian because of our example, because of our prayers, and because of our perseverance and the time that we spend with them. And so we bring another person into the church, and then next year they will do the same, and then we will do the same. Before long, in one generation, the entire world will be exposed to Jesus Christ. The key to all of this is Our Lady. She's appeared many times. God has allowed her to appear many times in the world in approved apparitions, but the one most powerful to me was when she came to Mexico City, Tepeyac, in the apparition of Our Lady of Guadalupe. She did what the church was not able to do for generations. After the veneration of that sacred image of Our Lady of Guadalupe, after one generation, the entire country of Mexico and all of Latin America converted to the Christian faith. And 500 years later is still deeply Catholic. And that's something that the Jesuits and the Franciscans had very little success with, to convert an indigenous people that were really steeped in ancestor worship in their own ways. But when Our Lady revealed herself to them in this particular way, in one generation they became Christian. But we are told, and the first thing that we're attacked upon for being Catholic is our relationship with Our Lady. And so as we start to approach now, after next week, 2 weeks from today, we'll begin the season of Advent, which is basically the last 4 weeks of a pregnancy. And we can journey with Our Lady, that she brings us all closer to Christ. And so these next 2 weeks and the 4 weeks to follow that are filled with opportunities for us to follow Jesus and to bring others to him.